This loneliness piece is very interesting. One of the things, as we were talking to people putting together the program, something that came up more than I expected it to was this word loneliness. That being an advisor can be a really lonely experience. And that at first doesn't make sense to me. You're literally in a room full of
Right, with the people.
alone. But is
Everyone's there.
Yeah, but everyone's with their own advisory. And so as an adult, to be around other adults talking about advisory, if we ran our advisory meetings like we run advisory, giving time to connect, time to talk about what's going well, time to ask questions, we actually know what works. And then we can also turn around and maybe replicate or turnkey some of those activities into our own advisory. But
Mhm.
time to be with each other and to sort of respect the professional nature of that role, which requires preparation, collaboration, support. It's like a secondary job.
Yeah,
It's a role that goes after all the other things that you do. It's not the first thing in your job description. In
right.
some schools, it's not even in your job description. But it takes skill, it takes growth, it takes support. That includes, how are you doing? Hey, I noticed this about your advisory, or it sounds like some kids are struggling, or the group dynamic isn't great, or let's have those conversations more. It's another way we leave advisors to be lonely. If you're struggling or if the group is hard, you don't want to be alone in that.
Welcome to the table. I'm Bridget Johnson. Today, we're welcoming back a guest who is now my business partner and co founder of the Advisory Alignment Collective, Alan Brown, an educator and former dean who spent years inside advisory programs figuring out why some click and most just coast. If you've ever been handed a list of advisees with no runway and told to go build relationships in 15 minutes a day, today's conversation is going to give you language for what advisory was always meant to be. We get into the word that kept surfacing during our interviews with advisors: loneliness, and how schools give adults time to talk about every other subject except the one role they all share. We get into why being a good teacher does not make you a good advisor, because advisory strips away the content and leaves only the relationship. And we also get into the question to ask on your own campus this week. I challenge you, walk around and ask people what advisory is for, because when you get a different answer from everyone, that is your misalignment staring back at you. Now, here's my conversation with Alan. Alan, welcome back to the table. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I feel nice to be back at the table, which
Good
is
to have you.
thank you. Thank you. Same place we spent many hours making this program. So,
Yes, many, many hours.
yeah.
So let's start at the beginning, not at the beginning of the Advisory Alignment Collective, but how we started our journey together, because I think the way we came into this work actually matters. Do you remember the first conversation we had where you thought, okay, we could maybe, this is going to be an interesting endeavor?
Well, I can't remember if it was actually here on the podcast or in one of our conversations about the podcast, because that was really the first time we met. We didn't know each other
Right.
the last time I sat in this hot seat. But you kind of mentioned, ooh, advisory, like, ooh, that's a thing. Let's talk about that. But I
Right.
think that might be its own episode. Is something.
Fair enough.
Are. Um, you and I both, as student life professionals, have spent a lot of time in schools with advisories and supporting advisors, being advisors, running advisory programs, and I think both of us had the same experience, which is like, could always be. It seems like there's more promise to it in a lot of places, but
Right.
it just sort of gets short shrift, not because people want it to have short shrift, but because you make a lot of other decisions and it's like maybe not everyone's cut out for this work, or are they, or could they be, or some people are just good advisors and some people aren't, or we just kind of take what we get because every
Right.
is an advisor. And but we sort of feel like, I think we could I think we could have spent more in advisory. That's my remembrance of our very first conversation. I wonder what you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just come off of the roundtable conference where everyone was talking about advisory and how like what can we do differently? It's just, pulling my hair out over here. How are you guys managing? And so that conversation really sparked in me. I was like, there's there's an opportunity to be helpful. And so I always am looking for those opportunities, a way to help individuals and schools kind of be their best selves. And I'm like, I think we need to do something with advisory. And so when we had our initial conversation, we started talking about advisory. I was like, ding, 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 ding. Here we go. Let's see if we can make this happen.
Yeah.
So
And I think my recollection is that we coalesced pretty early around an idea of maybe there's a little bit of a different approach for making the student experience of advisory better, or the
yeah.
advisor's experience better, that isn't about what we're doing or advisory binders. I don't know if you want to dive
Yeah,
the
definitely not
binder.
about the binder, but we'll dive into that a little bit later. But I
Well,
want to ask you first, why does advisory matter?
mm. I mean, when I think of well, it should be an easy question, right? But
Right.
advisory is really it's got a lot of intangibles. When I
Yeah.
think to my own experience as an independent school student, I was in schools where my relationship with adults made a big difference. And
Mhm.
and was kind of the differentiator for me about what school was like. Like, it's why I liked school. I liked school because I liked being there. Yes, I had friends and I liked all those things, but I liked how the whole place felt. And the whole place felt like the adults cared about me. And I think that's for a lot of us in schools is why we do what we do. And
Yeah,
it
sure.
is the place where we can really live up to that promise. It's like a little community, a little micro community is a word you use a lot and I like. It's a little almost family, not quite family, but it's just
Right.
these little communities within a school, which is otherwise very big. Even if your school's really small. I mean, my middle school was 80 people, but
Wow.
but still,
Yeah.
in that you need the small group where you can just sit around, whether it's a table or not a table, and feel seen, feel like you're really known, like you belong, you matter. Someone would miss you if you weren't there. This group of people knows you.
Yeah,
School needs to feel like that for us to do well in school and also to feel connected to school and to the school community so that it isn't just we come, we do assignments, we
right.
do class and we go home.
Right. Because for some kids, that experience of, spending 8 hours in a place and not feeling like they're seen or that they belong. And everyone's that, I feel like belonging is now the buzzword, right? Like everyone's talking about belonging, but that probably should have been something we've been talking about a long time ago. But the importance of having somewhere that you come and you spend 8 hours of your day where you feel comfortable enough to be yourself, where you feel like, you are able to make mistakes and be okay with that and not feel like the world is ending, even though in adolescence sometimes we feel like the world is ending anyway because that's just the nature of adolescence. But providing that space, school should provide that space for students, right, where they feel like, all right, I can do this, I got this, and I've got people around me to help me with that.
I mean, my
So
belief is that that wherever we are, and in this case it's school, but that we should create every organization, every institution as human beings, it's kind of a birthright to be yourself where you are.
yeah,
And I think advisory again, it's like a way, it's a mechanism by which schools can create that sense.
for sure. So, what do you think it takes to move advisory from a good idea to a meaningful student experience?
Yeah, we have had a lot of conversations about this. And I think in talking to advisory leaders, one of the phrases that came out for us was, you don't want to just have advisory, you want to have an advisory that works. We
Right.
want to have an advisory that really is meaningful, does meaningful work and feels meaningful to advisors, to kids.
Yep.
I think something that happens in a lot of advisory programs when I'm talking to schools that are struggling with advisory It's like,
Mhm.
how do we help the advisors do something different? And when I start diving under the hood, like, tell me about your program. How does it work? And inevitably, there are design decisions like, well, the kids don't really know each other very well, but they only meet once every 2 months. Or, you know, things that it doesn't feel relaxed. It doesn't feel like a family. Oh, but we have this curriculum and they have to get through 4 lessons a week. It's like there are a lot of design decisions, I think, that make advisory either move towards having relationships and this sense of community, belonging, whatnot, or move it away from that. And as you and I were talking, I think our sense was, could we take a step back? This is not about just training advisors. Obviously, there are some real skills that are important, and I think I'm sure we'll talk about those. And they're teachable. Is the good news, but to you can have whatever conversations we want with advisors. If
Mhm.
the actual container, if the structure, if the design of advisory isn't working towards the same purpose that you want it to serve, if you're
Yeah.
not, you know, designing it in a way that helps it to do the work of advisory, I think that's really what we're exploring as a way to move the needle is how do we look first at creating a program that's structured to do the certain work? Actually, before we do that, what is the purpose? What do we want it to do?
Right. What do we want it to do? Yeah.
And oftentimes we don't articulate it. It's just this intangible advisory. It's supposed to
Yeah, it's
feel
a
good,
thing. You know what it is.
right? We all have because we do. We sort of have a vague sense. We don't usually define it, and if we haven't defined it or haven't named that purpose, we can't design in a way that is it moving us towards this purpose or away from this purpose? And then
Right.
when we have that, then we can talk about what are the skills we might need to, make that all happen.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, being an advisor, I think, is harder than people give credit for. Often people will say like, "Well, if you're a teacher, you can be an advisor," but I think maybe that's not true.
I don't think it's true at all, actually. I think people just assume because you're a great teacher that you're gonna be a great advisor, and those are not transferable skills necessarily in the way that you think they are, right? And so people they don't have a lot of intentionality around talking about what it means to be an advisor and how to build those relationships, and so I think that's the first mistake sometimes schools make, is they don't talk about advisory and the importance of it in the life of the school, why they have it, but also giving the adults the tools they need to help manage that. It's about relationship building, and so if we aren't talking about how to actively build relationships, then it's really hard to come into an advisory group with students you may or may not know and build those relationships. And so I always think about those qualities that the best advisors have in common, and so I think about those things, but while those things are important, it's also important to remember that some of those skills you have to build. It's not just kind of innate. And so when we think about those what the best advisors have in common, what do you think?
Well, okay. I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second. I'm thinking
Okay.
like former classroom teacher. I spent a lot of time in the classroom, and I relationships were important to me as a classroom teacher.
Sure.
But so it's not totally not untransferable. But I think you're right that facilitating a group of kids around not having content. If I'm a history teacher, I have the history to lean on, or I have an obvious activity.
Right.
Today we are learning about blank. This is the thing we're going to do, and it's organized to help you gain this skill or gain this knowledge or whatever. And
Yep.
advisory takes that part away. So it's almost like the skill is, can you do the same things hopefully you're doing in the classroom, which is we should be noticing and relating to kids and learning about them and who they are and recognizing them as people and building I mean, I need a relationship with them to teach them well, but now I need a relationship just for a relationship, and not so much to teach them well. So it's asking teachers, and by the way, I think we should also acknowledge not everyone who's an advisor is a teacher,
True.
which is a good thing. That's the other piece of this is you don't have to be a teacher to be an advisor. You have to be a
Right.
person who's able to listen to children, to be warm, to facilitate a group, to have a group of people sit in a circle, or not exactly a circle, but the idea of a circle that we could go
Hmm.
around and hear, how's your day? What's going on? Tell me a little bit about your life. And, so, like, let's get to know you. Let's support each other. Let's be in this together. This
Right.
thing we do day in and day out here for these 8 hours or whatever that we're at school. And so those skills, kind of the listening, the facilitation, the moves that help kids deliberately be known not through content, but just by sitting in a room together. That's what's different, and
Hmm.
maybe the part that just doesn't come naturally to everyone just because you're around kids at other points in the day for
Right.
job.
And I don't think we name it. And so I think if we actually named that and said that to people, it might take the pressure off a little bit. But again, we make a lot of assumptions about the adults who are being advisors in the community about their level of comfortability, kind of managing those pieces. That's not real content, and
Yeah,
real content meaning not history or science or what have you. In a space that's also a short period of time generally. And so you're supposed to do this
you don't
thing
have
in
power.
15 minutes. And so that's very different than showing up in a class every day and spending 45 to sometimes 70 minutes with students, because by nature of spending time together, you're building that relationship, right? And
Yeah,
so I always think about, I've been thinking about it, I wouldn't say always, because I hadn't thought about it either. When I was an advisor, I was just, put in there, here are your 6 kids that you're going to advise. I had never advised before, the
let it
first
go.
time. And so, woohoo, let's do it. And so I was like, well, I guess it's kind of like coaching. And so that was the approach I took. But, if you haven't coached before, if you haven't had that sort of relationship, then it's again hard to kind of think about, well, how do I be? What do I do here?
Yes.
And so it's tricky, right?
Which and that question of, like, being versus doing,
Mm,
that I think is one of the key shifts in thinking about what it takes to be a skillful advisor versus maybe what's different about being a teacher or some
yeah.
other role, right? That the ways of being. You mentioned earlier kind of qualities that are common to good advisors. I don't know if you want to say more about sort of what those qualities are, but I think when we start to name them, we can actually replicate them, we can do them, we can build
Yeah.
them ourselves, right?
Well, I think you started to talk about them already, like being a good listener, right? And so being able to kind of hold the things that the students have when they come to you, like being able to kind of manage the relationships with the students within the group, but also the students' relationship with the school. Because again, you talk about the micro communities, right? You're the smaller connection to the larger school. And so helping kids manage that, whether it's through with their academics or their extracurricular or even their social lives, being that link that connects them to the school, that makes them make sure that they understand the information that they've been given, they know how to navigate the nuances of the school and the school community, that they're making connections properly and they're getting the help that they need. And so thinking about how you do that on a regular basis seems kind of natural for a school teacher in a school community, but there are also some other things that you may just need to have or to just think about or keep in mind as you're moving through that process. And so I also wonder, because I think we don't talk about enough what advisors need.
Right.
And in particular, one of the things that I think sometimes gets lost is the opportunity for advisors to connect with each other, to know how other folks are managing their advisory group. But I'm not going to say too much about that now. What do you think advisors need in order to succeed?
Well, funny, you and I have talked about this before, so I
We
have
have.
the same thing. Um, but yeah, this loneliness piece is very interesting. One of the things, as we were doing some, interviews and talking to people putting together the program, something that came up more than I expected it to was this word loneliness. That being an advisor can be a really lonely experience, and that at first doesn't make sense to me. Really, like, you're literally in a room full of
Right, with the people.
not lonely, but is
Everyone's there.
yeah, but everyone's with their own advisory. And so as an adult, to be around other adults talking about advisory, I often get department time, I get division time. There is in any school I've ever worked, I've never seen a school that has as much time for the adults to talk about advisory as it has for everything else. And
Right.
this idea of being able to connect with the other adults and for advisory to be less lonely. I
Mhm.
sometimes think about it as just if we ran our advisory meetings like we run advisory, giving time to connect, time to talk about what's going well, time to ask questions, time to, we actually know what works. And then we can also turn around and maybe replicate or turnkey some of those activities into our own advisory. But
Mhm.
time to be with each other and to sort of respect the professional nature of that role, which requires preparation, collaboration, support, like all those things I think are they tend to be missing, as does mm, feedback.
Yes.
Because advisory is for almost everyone, except maybe the person who runs the program. It's like a secondary job.
Yeah.
It's a role that goes after all the other things that you do. It's not the first thing in your job description. In
Right.
some schools, it's not even in your job description. It's just it's part of the
And
additional duties as a or whatever. Like
right.
maybe a middle school advisor. But it takes skill, it takes growth, it takes support. That includes how are you doing? Hey, I noticed this about your advisory, or it sounds like some kids are struggling, or the group dynamic isn't great, or let's have those conversations more. I
Yeah.
would say, because it's another way we leave advisors to be lonely. If you're struggling or if the group is hard, you don't want to be alone in that. That sucks.
Right. It does suck. And it makes you anxious and nervous about the group, and kids pick up on that energy, right? And so you wanna have the opportunity to kind of get your questions out and come to that space in a calm and even manner so that the kids can feel that energy, and, respond accordingly.
Yeah, that idea of presence, I think,
Mhm.
just what it feels to be in the presence of a person who is warm or kind or at ease versus a person who feels frazzled or doesn't want to be there or what. The presence, I think, is maybe the number one quality of a good advisor.
Yeah.
It's that the Maya Angelou people will remember. They won't remember what you say or do. They will remember how you make
How
them
you made them
feel.
feel.
That is true. I
Absolutely
I
true.
I remember how the adults in my schools made me feel. That's what
Yeah.
I carry now in my 40s.
I love that. And so I think the other thing that advisors need in order to succeed is understanding the mission, purpose, goal of advisory at your school. Again, I think we make a lot of assumptions when people kind of roll into our school communities, and we give them the purpose and for all the other things, but we don't necessarily talk about what the purpose is for advisory. And, we've got our admissions brochures that talk about why we do advisory. We've got what we say to our parents on when they come for revisit days or come to campus for tours. We have all of this information, but is it are we, and I think you talked about this earlier, are we moving towards those things or away from those things by the actual programming that we're doing, about how we schedule advisory time, about what we tell students advisory is about? And I don't know if we ask schools if people are being explicit about that all the time. And one reason or one way we know that is when you ask people on campus what advisory is for, you
Everyone
oftentimes
different.
have different answers from everyone you talk to. So
Yeah.
that's a clear indication that something might not be aligned, which is why our organization is called, or our company, what do we want to call it? Is it an organization? Is it a company? Is it a thing? I don't know. But it's an advisory alignment collective
No,
and an
exactly.
advisory alignment program. So alignment, let's talk about alignment a little bit. Why is it important to be aligned,
Oh, why is it important to be? Because as you
Al?
say, if we all have a different idea of what this thing is, and again, it's not that they're total opposites, not that everyone is wildly in left field, but
Right.
there's a lot of subtle anxiety that comes from not having a very clear, simple name to this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. You named the idea of having a purpose, but the other thing that you talk about really well, and I always appreciate, is having a job description. I,
Yeah.
you, you when you were hired for your role, I've heard you say many times, they didn't just show you the mission statement of the school, they showed you the job description, right? And so understanding what we are doing means that we could all do the same thing and we could all work towards the same goal and we can support each other in it versus guessing. I think there's a lot of guesswork in programs that struggle, or
Hmm.
programs that don't quite feel like they've clicked. You
Right.
buy with advisory, you have advisory, but not have an advisory that works. I think the
Yep.
difference often between those is everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction, and it feels clear, so that it isn't just, I think this is what I'm supposed to do, or I think we're supposed
Hmm.
to be doing this, or someone else does this really differently in their advisory and we know where that's okay. Like, that's how they do advisory, this is how I do
Right.
it, and we're all under the same umbrella just being ourselves, cool.
Hmm.
Or why is that teacher doing all these conferences and they're talking to the student support team and they're doing this and that feels like not what I'm supposed to do, or I don't think that's my lane, or I don't, is this how we do advisory, what is the
Yeah.
advice for, and do that. And then the parents, like, am I supposed to call you or am I supposed to talk to the teacher about this, or should I be calling someone else? Like, when we don't know, there's just so much, um the confusion creates anxiety, or it just creates, it's a program that's unsettled, it's ungrounded, maybe.
All of that and the disparity in experience that the students get, right? And so that's the end result. Like some
Yeah,
students are in advisories and they're cooking with oil, right? Like they're having conversations, they're connecting, they're doing all the things together.
I
They
love my advice.
really, I love my advisor. And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, people who just maybe go in and do like their homework or they don't talk or they don't make those connections because we haven't made it crystal clear about what the purpose is for an advisory. And so then what happens is you get people who are labeled as great advisors and others who are labeled as bad advisors. And those people with great advisors have 12 advisees, and the people who are bad at advising have three. And so where is that fair? And I know life isn't fair in general, but I'm just saying, like, that's not, I mean, we talk about burnout, we talk about people who are just kind of overextended, and that comes from sometimes being kind of good in those spaces but being good in those spaces, but and I pause because it's not necessarily they're just good, they just kind of have an idea of how this is supposed to work, right? But then you've got the disparity of people who are maybe a little less comfortable, and they are like, "Well, I'm just kinda throwing up my hands, I'm not interested," or, "I have so much anxiety about this that it's better for me just not, to do this." And then sometimes those folks get rewarded. They don't have to
But
advise as
now you're
much.
not now you're not an advisor anymore.
Yeah,
You win an extra free period because you stopped advising, basically, or yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's no fair.
And so that's, I think, one of the important pieces of our program. So let's talk a little bit about the program. There are two phases of the program. Alan, do you want to talk about the first phase, which is, for the administrators?
Yes, because I love it. Um, well, and to the point that we mm, to your point, early, no, what was the point? I don't know. Do I wanna talk about the two phases? Yes, I do, because I love it. Okay, pause. Um, we w as we were having conversations, hold on, I'm gonna give him more time to as we were having conversations about how do we help advisory, we really wanted to get away from this idea that it's about what you do. So many advisory trainings focus on having a binder of activities, or these are the things to do in advisory, and get back to that structural question of design. And so we feel like before we talk to advisors, or actually, even if we never talk to advisors, we
Mhm.
believe we can strengthen the program by just looking at that container, those design decisions. And so the first
Yes.
part, before we want to think about the advisors, is auditing the structural decisions that shape how advisory runs. That's how you're making your groups. It's, do you have a purpose statement, or are you clear on what advisory helps your school to do? Because it is different in every school. It
Mhm.
is a uniform, it's not like teaching BC calculus.
Right.
You take the same test at the end. The math is the same. It doesn't change. It's really different at every school. And have we articulated that?
Mhm.
Then, if we've articulated it, then we can understand that everything we look at after that Does it help us achieve this purpose? Do we have a job description? Have we clearly articulated the role? Where are kids meeting? What are the room situation? I know advisory like taxes a lot of people's physical plan, but if folks are sitting, next to the dumpster and in a room with no walls, it's kind of like not necessarily conducive. Oh, we shouldn't wonder why that group has a hard time coming together compared to the group that meets in a very nice space with the couches in a circle, or they have a seminar room and they've got a table they sit around, they've got actual space to put their backpacks down. I mean, these things really influence how the program goes. So we've
Right.
got a six module um, a six module progression to examine how does this go in a team of people who lead advisory and who are advisors. We also think that just making decisions in a vacuum for advisors isn't always the best choice.
Maybe not so good.
Let's
Yep.
bring together some people who all have a stake and maybe different expertise in how advisory is going to go. Your student support folks, advisors, people who administrators, and let's really dig in and create the conditions that the program itself needs to thrive, and that sets advisors up to do their work well, as opposed to, well, they'll figure it out. I know that kind of sucks. Oh, that's really kind of hard to make a group when you won't see them more than once a month, but it's all
They'll
we
figure it
got.
out.
Right, but then we can't be upset with advisors if the groups aren't really forming,
Right.
or if that experience doesn't feel meaningful to kids. So
Right.
we can make a lot of decisions up front. That's the
Yes.
first part. Then maybe you want to talk about the second part because there's
I
two of us.
do, and I also wanna just add that, we also make sure because we talked a little bit earlier about mission and job description and all those things, so we wanna make sure those pieces are set up for you, or at least give you the opportunity or space to have those conversations with your team about what those things are, so that before you if you decide to move on to the second course or second phase of the program, that
Which
you
is
have those pieces that you have those pieces in place so that it is crystal clear about mission, vision, goals, and what people's responsibilities are.
yeah.
So, in talking about the second phase or course, the program is for advisors. And so, this is not how to do advisory, but how to be an advisor. And we said that phrase earlier. And so, I think it's really important to come back to that because it's great to have a binder and to have programming and that sort of thing, but you also need to think about the relationship building, and that is the core of advisory, building a relationship with these students so that they feel comfortable coming to you with their issues or concerns in this smaller community, that they're building relationships with other students on a smaller scale so that they do feel like they belong, have someone on campus who sees them and knows what's happening with them in their everyday life. The details of their lives matter. And so we want to make sure that someone on the school campus knows the details of their life. Someone is looking them in the eye and calling them by their name. I've talked about oftentimes about there are some students who move through the school day without ever hearing their name. And so we want to make sure that we are creating conditions for students to feel like they have a safe space to come to. And so that's what we talk about in the program. And so thinking about how to build relationships, thinking about troubleshooting when those relationships aren't going well, right? Because sometimes they don't go well and it's no fault of anyone. We're not placing blame. We're not saying you should have done a better job at X, Y, or Z. We're human beings and we want to know, and we don't always get things right. But modeling that behavior, first of all, and saying, oh, didn't get that right. Let's
Yeah.
rewind that. Let's do a reset. Let's come back and see what's going on here so that we can kind of move forward in a more productive way. Those are the sorts of things that we're talking about in the second course for advisors is how to be an advisor. What is important for you to know or to think about when you're building these relationships? Think about your own triggers. Are there things from high school that, kind of are a little bit sensitive for you so that when you encounter those with your advisees, it makes it hard for you to be a good advisor. We talk about those things because they're important to talk about. And if we're not transparent, if we can't be vulnerable in a way that's appropriate,
Sure.
then you are missing an opportunity to really connect with students. And so that's a little bit of it. Alan, do you want to add other
Yeah.
pieces to that?
I mean, you just touched on this. I think making explicit that there is both internal work and external work in this role, to be in relationship with other human beings. And again, divorced of or kind of separate from content. It's not a content
Yes.
thing, it's a human first thing. That means you yourself bringing your own humanity to things, which for some folks feels really, really vulnerable. It's like, well, I'm not going to tell them about, my therapy last week. Please.
As well, you shouldn't.
No, right, like, that's a boundary. That's not what we mean by being human, but you are a human being. You have interests and preferences and, a personality, and all of those things should come to bear, should be present in advisory. We also all have different things that are maybe depleting about advisory. Like, not all humans value in the same way, or I shouldn't say value, not all humans are energized by being in a group of other people. Like,
Right.
I could think maybe for my downtime, I'd like to be around nobody.
That part.
Like, that doesn't feel as familiar or easy for everyone. So it's kind of finding the ways for those things to not get in the way of having relationships with kids, or not coming to resent that time and just grin and bear it or white knuckle it till the end of the period.
Right.
Really knowing, like, what is it like and what do I need for myself? Maybe I need to be able to recharge after advisory or pre-charge before advisory,
Hmm.
because I know, not that it's that I don't want to be around them or that I am disinterested in supporting kids or having a group or anything. I just have to know that that isn't immediately what charges my battery, and that's
Right.
okay. So naming stuff like that to help us, again, have the capacity. So there's the physical capacity, the emotional capacity, the bandwidth, all those things can help us feel way more prepared for advisory time. Again, rather than just waiting it out or just going by default because everyone does it, because we have it and it's there, but we don't really have expectations about what happens. It's just like, go and hope it all works
Go
out.
forth. Go
Yeah.
forth and
Go
advise.
forth and advise. Go forth and advising. I think the other thing too, you mentioned a lot about the individual relationships with kids, but I think it's helpful to name, and we do this in the playbook. You're working at a lot of different levels of relationship, and they're all happening
Yes.
once. There's the whole group, and how are they getting along? There's the individual relationships that they are having with each other. How are
Hmm.
they getting along with one another,
Yep.
how is they getting along as a group? There's how is the group and their relationship with me. There's how is my relationship with each of these individual kids. Like, it's a lot to juggle. In some ways, that's more than a classroom that we're
Right.
and so, it's worth naming, and hopefully giving kids or giving advisors some language and skills around how to do all of those things and pay attention to each of them.
Yes. And so just a little bit of a recap. The first phase, the advisory audit, because we didn't name it. So I feel like
Yeah,
we should go back and actually name it.
yeah.
Um,
Got a name.
uh,
We
yeah, we
audit.
have a name. You're auditing your advisory program. You're doing all those things that we talked about in terms of structure and job description and mission, vision, goals to set yourself up for the advisors to have a good experience and also the students to have a good experience. And then the second phase, course two, is the advisory playbook. And so all the things that we just talked about in terms of how to be, um, you know, what you want to do, what's that's not what I want to say. Um, Now I don't know what I want to say. Um, So the advisory playbook is more about how to be an advisor, how to build those relationships, and all those little things that we talked about. Those details are important, and so we can't just kind of gloss them over, overlook them, or act like they don't matter because they do. And so, Alan, what schools do you think will likely benefit most from this program?
I think a lot of schools will benefit from it.
Okay.
Any school that I ever worked at and had an advisor could have benefited from this. Uh, but I think maybe the school that I would say is most stands most to benefit or to gain from this, the school is really ready to dive into honestly assessing the contain the audit piece. Like, are we really ready to say, maybe the ways that we've been doing this haven't fed or nourished the program in the ways that it could, and we're open to making structural changes and dedicating the time. So we have 6 different modules that they're designed for a group that's going to meet together over, could be 6 weeks, could be, however you space it out is up to you, but it's working through several different conversations and assignments as a group. That takes some resources.
Right.
Similarly, for the advisors, you know, okay, you could just sort of assign a training, hope it all works out. We do that with, like, what, bloodborne pathogens, infectious clients, so
Boundaries.
those sorts of things. Fine, if you're looking to check a box, you could, but does that move a needle? I don't know. Actually, I do. I don't think it does. Um, but are we ready to make space for conversations about what did you learn? What are we ready to make space for advisors to talk with one another about what's hard and what's not, about what they're taking away, and really sort of develop skills, give this its due as a professional set of skills and conversations that are going to lead to a different result. So I think it's about what we are willing to put in is what we're going to get out of the investment.
Yeah, that's fair. And so, as we think about kind of wrapping this up, because I think we've done um I always have fun having conversations with you, but I think we want to make sure that people are really thinking about their advisory program in real terms, where they are currently, not where they aspire to be, right? Like, how is your advisory program functioning? I hope, if nothing else, people take away from this conversation that they should be thinking about the details of their advisory. If they have a mission statement, is there a job description? How do you onboard people to do advisory? Do you talk about it in your interview process? When do you introduce advisory to the adults in terms for the new people on campus? Is it just here's your advisory group and this is when advisory meets, or do you have additional conversations or a runway to ramp up to being an advisor? And thinking about that as the nature of our schools have changed a little bit. So, people are looking for more value added to, their school experience in independent schools, especially. Like, what am I paying for here? And if you can really point to and people already use advisory as a differentiator. And so if you are clear about your advisory goals, if you have um clear metrics and feedback loops and opportunities for people to kind of get together and talk about how advisory is going, you're really going to provide a rich student experience and an experience that's more even than not. Because that's a thing that we talked about earlier, the student experience just being so widely different depending on who you get as an advisor. And so we want to reduce that as much as possible.
Yeah. And if I were thinking about a takeaway for folks, I think it's that advisory can be more than just fine. You know, that
Absolutely. That's a
that
great one.
that there's a path to that, that we can quantify on the design side, some specific inputs that will lead to different results. And on the delivery side for advisors, there are quantifiable, knowable, and learnable skills and techniques and things like that. That is not just giving someone a lesson plan and hope it works out, or an activity
Yeah.
plan game to play with your advisors, but understanding why we are doing that, what is the function of this, and the skills that are needed to, kind of, there's this, it's like a pot like simmering underneath. You're just like always simmering, cooking those relationships,
Mm,
and
I
the
like that.
feeling of what it means to be in this group. Because again, that is what we remember. That is what we take with us. And that is such a wholesome support, which I really genuinely believe that every student in every one of our schools deserves. And not for nothing, so do the teachers. It
Absolutely.
You'll have a lovely advisor group when that group graduates or moves on or whatever, and they're like, we have to have an advisory breakfast. We're gonna miss you. We're gonna do like those moments of we have actually become really close over these years. That is there's nothing better as a teacher, honestly. So
It's not. I mean, it's such a
an advisor,
rewarding
because you
experience.
might not be able to.
Exactly. And so it is such a rewarding experience to have those connections. And when you think about, how people remember their experience, and you said it best, it's those people that were there in your life during that time for you that you remember most. Not necessarily a course, a class that you took. Or maybe it could be a play or a sporting event, but it's usually those people that make that experience for you more meaningful. And so, why don't we
No,
equip those adults to make sure that they are ready to help have those meaningful experiences with students so that they still feel connected to the community. So they want to give back, they want to participate, but also they want to kind of pay that forward. And so that's why we built this program, right? We
right.
want to help schools manage those relationships well. We
And
want
what
to
if I'm
make
ready?
say that again. I didn't hear you.
I just got so excited. You should finish your thought or something.
No, it's all good. Go ahead. Jump right in. I love it.
What if I'm ready? What if I want in?
Yeah, so exactly. And so if you are ready, we're going to put in the show notes how you can get in contact with us. But we are looking for 8 schools to pilot this program, and we are starting in June. And so the program is ready to go. So if you are thinking about your advisory program this summer, you want to get together with the administrative team who helps kind of run advisory or puts together the student life programming in your school, this is a wonderful time to have those conversations and start thinking about advisory in a different way. Because, advisory is not just a homeroom with a different name. And so when it's designed with intention and supported with real tools, it's a really powerful for schools, a place where students are known. And so that's why we created the Advisory Alignment Collective. And so, again, if this conversation resonated, if you're a head of school, a dean of students, a director of advisory, or just someone who cares deeply about this work, let us know, and we will put that information in the show notes. And so, again, Alan, thank you so much for being here today. I have really enjoyed putting this project together with you. I know it's going to be helpful to schools. It's a really valuable tool. It's not like anything else that's out there. And so, thank you for partnering with me in this work,
Thank you.
business partner.
And thank you for having me at the table.
Absolutely. And folks, if you're not already following us on Instagram and TikTok, search for Dean's Roundtable on both platforms. We'd love to see you there. If you're enjoying the table, please subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave us a review. It really helps us find more people. And so, thank you again for pulling up a chair to the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe something even to bring back to your school. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Alan Brown, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.